Hi and welcome to this video tutorial on Wisenet Viewer configuration. I'm your guide, Gordon of Hanwha Vision, and in this course we're going to cover the following topics. Adding an NVR to your Wisenet Viewer client, updating firmware for your cameras and recorders, user management, layouts, event setup, logs, and local settings. There are also two parts of Wisenet Viewer Operation that you should also watch to gain skill in using Wisenet Viewer. Here is my Wisenet Viewer desktop application, and what I'm going to do to start with, the first thing that we need to do is add an NVR. So I will go to Setup and Device Setup, Device List, or I can go to Add Device itself. Either one of those was going to bring me up the screen. Now, it's already scanned the network, and so it's come up with some of these recorders that are already there. I will choose this particular recorder, and I will give it the credentials to log into that particular recorder. And register. That will register this particular recorder. Now, if the recorder that you're wanting to find is not being listed, you can do a refresh. Provided it's on the same network, check your IP address. It should appear. But I don't need to do that because I already have my recorder registered. So I will close that. And there you can see I have some channels enabled and some channels not enabled. But on the whole, I've got the recorder here with my cameras, and so I can flick through or just click through some of these and see the cameras in question. And I can close this window now because I've already set up the recorder, and it's going to appear here as group XRN1620 because that is the recorder that I've chosen. And I can double click and bring the camera in, or I can drag a camera in, and with the camera I can close it. I can drag in a different camera. I can resize the cameras or move the cameras. Let me get the resize. Come on. And just move them around. And I can zoom out and control my desktop. And if I grab the corner there, and I can drag it out as so. And then I can use the auto fit to auto fit the camera views to my desktop and just drag in the cameras as I need them. There I have a duplication here, so I can close this one. And I just keep going until I'm happy with my layout. One of the great features of Wisenet Viewer is the ability to do centralized firmware updates for your devices. If I go to the setup and I go to device setup, I can go to device maintenance here, or if I go back to the setup menu, you've got another option, and that is to go to maintenance directly. And it will give you this list here. Now, all of these are cameras that are currently connected to the NVR, and I can upload a firmware update to any one of these cameras using this button here. To prevent users from doing things on the system that you don't want them to do, for example, being able to download export footage and upload that to YouTube to show off a funny example of things that are happening, which would infringe on privacy rights and possibly get the company into trouble, we can set up and granulate the rights of users and groups. So here is our user group, our user setup. I can go in there. At the moment, we only have the one user. What I'll do is I'll add another user. And in this case, I'm going to give it my name. So that will be my login plus my name. Give it a password. Of course, I'm not going to tell you what my password is. Email address, I don't think is required at this point, and I can give it a description. We're just going to say this is an operator. And here you'll see I only have the administrator group at the moment, but there's a handy feature whereby I can create the user group right here while I'm creating the user. I can create the user group name and the operator, Operators. And operators will have the ability to do playback. I don't want them to export video. I don't want them to see local recording. I do want them to have PTZ control and use the microphone and audio. This is just an example, of course. And so the other thing I can do is I can choose which cameras they can see and which cameras they cannot see. So I'm going to leave it as those 4 cameras and click OK. Before I do that, we can do the shared layout as well. So if I do have a layout on the interface, I can choose that and they'll have access to that pre-saved layout. So what I'll do now is I'll log out of admin and log in with my new user. I do want to save the ID. Actually, I don't want to save the ID because I still want my admin to show up when I need it. And I'll just use the credentials to log in. And now I will be able to see those 4 cameras. I've pulled that camera in twice, by the way, but I can change it around. Actually, I want it over there. I want that one over there. Yeah, like that. Okay, so I've got those 4 cameras. I can view the playback video. Can I export? No, I cannot, but I can add bookmarks. The bookmarks are a good idea. So they find an incident on the video. For example, they can bookmark that, and then the supervisor can come and have a look at the bookmarks later and then decide whether or not to export, or export in the presence of the police if necessary. With the live cameras, there is a very cool feature whereby I can grab the group of cameras and pull them all in at once, and it will populate the layout with all of the cameras. Now, what I want to do is I want to save this, save layout as all cameras. And as the eagle eyes out there have noticed, 2 of the cameras are currently disconnected. So what I will do with those is, if I go back to my device list, I can choose those 2 cameras and disable them. And so they're not enabled on the system. You see it says success. And they've disappeared from the layout. So let's just try that again and see what happens. Drag in all cameras. Right click, save layout as all cameras, and apply. When I close the layout and double click on all cameras, I'll get that new layout again. So to set up an event, I'm going to set up an event on this fisheye camera over here. So I'll go back to the settings. I will choose Event Setup. I'll add a new event. Give the event a name. For example, it's a good idea to give it a name of what you expect to happen so that on seeing the description, you understand what it is. Or at least for the operator who hasn't named it himself. For the event type, I'm going to find person detection, so it should be under P, person detection, and that's going to be on camera 9. And then the action I want is to open a layout, the fisheye in the lobby, schedule always, and OK. So now we have our new event. Let's see if it works. Just pay careful attention to that screen. Once someone wanders through this scene over here, the tab with the layout should open. So as you can see there, the tab opened, the layout, with the fisheye camera in the position that I wanted it to be in. Perfect. Wisenet Viewer has logs of its own, not related to the MVR, but related to the interface itself. So under Settings, to access the logs, you go to Log, and you've got 3 different logs, and you can go directly to them from here, or we can just go to the logs themselves, which will start us with the very first one, which is the event log. you'll be able to see from the calendar, we've only got logs for the 13th at this point in time, but I could make it all of those days if there's enough information to populate it. And then we can search that time frame, and you can see motion detection, person detection, person detection. So the camera 9, person detection should be here, but there's quite a lot of information. Of course, we can export the logs and then we can look at them thereafter. System log will tell us about the system. For example, disconnected devices, or the CPU usage is is too high, and therefore it's going to be playing with iframes instead of showing full video. And then we've got the audit log, which shows what the users have been up to. So for example, there's one over there. I created the event rule earlier to find a person detection on the fisheye camera. Of course, I can export that as well. Now it's time to have a look at the local settings of Wisenet Viewer. If I click on the setup again, we go to system setup, which will take me to the local settings, or I can click directly there. We'll go here to prove my point. Local settings will give you the option to change your language if you wanted to. Quite a few languages in there. Auto start will run Wisenet Viewer on system startup, so your Windows, for example. Your media file folder, you can change that to point it to a different directory or folder where you would store the local videos that you want to display in the tree over here. Maximum recording time for manual recording will be set to 5 minutes. The recording type, Matroska MKV or Wisenet Viewer media file. Wisenet Viewer media file will have the settings local to Wisenet Viewer, so it'll have things like encryption and password settings that you'll see in the export video of this tutorial. Enable hardware acceleration if you've got a graphics card that will support that, and this is where you would come to enable or disable the joystick controller for your PTZ cameras. We'll also do notifications. So if there is something that's really bothering you and there's nothing you can do about it, let's say for example video loss, there's one particular camera, it keeps notifying you of video loss. You want it to continue to notify you of video loss, but not while you're waiting for the engineer to come and fix it. You can turn that off and then turn it back on later. I'm not going to turn it off here. Under maintenance, I've got my current version of Wisenet Viewer. I can update it from within the system. So if there is an update available for me, I'll have this green link available to me and I can update that there. Logs will open up the folder so you can see the Wisenet Viewer logs that we looked at earlier. We can back up the settings of the interface, so just the client, not the NVRs themselves. I can restore those settings, so be things like user groups, layouts, all of that good stuff. I can reset it back to factory defaults. I can view the open source license, and there is another thing here for future use. And that is the system and local settings. That was the configuration of Wisenet Viewer. If you haven't already seen them, go and find the following videos: Wisenet Viewer Operation Part 1 and Part 2, and the Wisenet Viewer Overview. Thank you for watching to the end, and I wish you all a fantastic day.